Welcome, welcome. My name is Dr. Kasia Kynes. I am Doctor of Clinical Nutrition and CEO and founder of EBV Global Institute. And today we have, a very special training. I'm going to talk about how do you know if you're reactivating EBV at a given time. And this is actually a question that has been asked most often in our community. We actually picked it out because asked this question so many times. And if you are new to your EBV reactivation and EBV infection, it can be really confusing. So today on the training, I'm going to cover a couple of things. First of all, we're going to talk about the two phases within the chronic EBV infection, the reactivation and the between reactivation stages. We're going to discuss the baseline. What does it mean when you have chronic EBV, whether it is one phase or the other, as opposed to a healthy person, because that can be confusing. And then we're going to talk about pros and cons of testing. Should you test if you suspect that you're reactivating at a given time? Finally, we're going to discuss presentations that may indicate that you are actually reactivating. We're going to talk about emotional, mental, and physical presentations. So let's go. So by the time you have EBV, you pretty much very quickly realize those phases yourself. I'm going to talk about the medical names for them. So we're going to talk about baseline. So baseline in a person with chronic EBV is very different from a baseline of a healthy person. I'm going to give you one prime example. It doesn't have to fit you, but I think you'll know exactly what I mean. So let's say we have quite a lot of athletic people in our community. So before EBV, your baseline was you could easily run a marathon. Maybe you were an athlete and that wasn't, a problem, or you jogged every day 3 miles, let's say. That's your baseline, that's your life, that was what you did. When you develop chronic EBV, there's two phases. One phase is, well, you have a new baseline, which is the chronic infection of this virus. And within that parameter, maybe on a good day, or maybe, 5 months out of 6 months, you are able to take a walk, maybe 3 minutes max. And then you have to go back home and maybe lie down a little bit and take a nap, right? It probably relates to you if you have EBV, you've been there. So you have to be very careful, and you really, really fast determine what your boundary is before you actually crash, right? So that's between the reactivations. That's the baseline. This is what people with chronic EBV have to navigate. How do I plan my day if I need to meet a colleague, if I have a business meeting? How do I navigate and plan everything so I don't crash because I only have that much energy? So that's your baseline. Very different and incapacitating already. But then this is between reactivations. When you reactivate actively, that baseline drops even further. And basically, the sentence that I hear all the time is, this is where people feel like they've been hit by a truck. There's nowhere else to go. This is the bottom line of the bottom. So let's say you can't even think about going for a walk for a minute. All you can spend the energy on is maybe go from the bedroom to the bathroom, take a shower, and you completely spent for the day. And this is very hard for other people to understand. The fatigue is so overwhelming, you can't even do anything else. So that's when you're reactivating. So let me see. Timeline. How much time do you have between one reactivation and another? It really varies. Some women that come to our community initially when their virus is really active, they will have that fluctuation up and down between the reactivation and the EBV baseline, corresponding to the menstrual cycles. So monthly. Sometimes, when you start getting better, you may have reactivation for a few weeks, and then maybe for a few months, you can stabilize and be within that baseline of the EBV. If you're not progressively working on protocols, therapies for EBV, you're not going to change your baseline necessarily, and the virus will continue growing and expanding into different organ systems and glands and so on. So it's kind of a losing battle. You can't just wait it out because it's not going to improve. So, the baseline changes really, if you start working on your EBV, it could be that you reactivate once a year. Maybe you can reactivate once every 2 years. It also depends on triggering factors, factors that contribute to reactivation. That's an entirely different training. But oftentimes people will know, it's like, wait a second, why am I tanking again? Why do I feel like I'm reactivating again? Oh, wait. XYZ happened. Now, of course, you get compromised somehow in your life. The virus is an opportunist, so you have to be vulnerable in certain way to reactivate, whether physical, mental, emotional, vulnerability, stress. So if you work on a protocol that actually is effective for EBV, you can train how to anticipate EBV reactivation based on your knowledge of this virus, based on knowing when it likes to reactivate, what are the typical triggering events, what are your personal triggering events. And then if you have all the tools, it is absolutely possible to reverse engineer that reactivation and turn it off within even 48 hours. It's been done in our community many times because that's what I teach. So in our community, people may reactivate maybe every year, every 2 years, depending on life's events and all the supporting tools they have and the lifestyle and all the education. So just to give you a map of possibilities and, where you are on the spectrum. So let's talk about those two phases a little bit. So there is a lysing phase and a latent phase. So the latent phase is the phase between reactivation. This is your baseline EBV. This is where you can maybe take that 1-minute walk, but you still have to be really, really cognizant, and you have to say no to most projects. You can't deliver full-time jobs sometimes, or you struggle. So between reactivations is actually how the virus relies on its perpetuation, not when you reactivate. Reactivation is only a fragment of the activity of the virus, but if we look at studies, the virus really relies on that between reactivation time. So you still have to work on some protocols to turn it off and prevent it from being in that between reactivation latent phase. So let's talk about the lysing phase when you actually reactivating. What does that mean? When you have infected cells, many of them B cells, your immune cells. So infected cells have all these young virions multiplying, cloning themselves, growing in your infected cells using your DNA. And then at certain time, like I said, there are triggering events that allow the virus to lyse out of your cells. So basically the cell bursts open and all those young virions are spilling into the blood. The blood is like a taxi delivering nutrients everywhere, and therefore the blood is a great system for the virus to be delivered everywhere. And so it can go into your joints, it can go into your lymph, eventually it can go into your brain, into your spleen, into your thyroid, into your liver, connective tissue, neurological symptom system. It just goes depending on a person. And so it's actively looking for a gland or an organ to go in, and then it goes into the cells of that organ, and that's where it lives and starts to clone itself in those cells again. So the lysing phase, the reactivating phase, is typically a couple of weeks to 3 weeks, maybe, depending on a person. And so you want to be aware of the fact that you can test for it, and this is the pros and cons of testing. but you have to test it right when you feel like you've been hit by a truck. You can't wait. So the pros of the testing is that, yeah, you can actually have the blood test to confirm that you're reactivating right now. And the antibody that you want to test is early antigen IgG. In contrast to what a medical doctor or functional doctor may be trained in, believing that IgG is past infection, the early antigen IgG antibody specifically is reactivating event, actually. So it's counterintuitive. This is why a lot of doctors can misdiagnose you because they don't know that that's what medical studies show. And so with that, the cons of testing is when you have reactivation, this is the worst time for you to drive, to seek the doctor, to argue about getting the test, because sometimes they are not open-minded and they don't want to test you because it's, if they don't know the medical literature, they will tell you testing is useless, there's nothing to do, and, you're barking under the wrong tree, basically. I hear that all the time. And you're not physically, mentally, you don't have the stamina to get to the lab and get the blood draw and go back home and crash. So if you have somebody driving you and doing that for you, great. Is it worth it? I don't know that it's worth it to test at that particular time. And pretty much I feel like in our community, people know when they reactivate, especially, after this training, hopefully it'll clarify. And so you don't have to go through that trauma when you're so sick. Another cons is that you have to, when you have early antigen tested, it's negative, it may be false negative. Some people, it's not often, but there are cases when people's immune system is so taxed, they've had this chronic reactivating EBV for so many years, sometimes decades, and sometimes the immune system is so taxed, it's not producing immunoglobulins anymore. So you're not making enough antibodies to get the positive result in the lab. So it could be false negative. There are ways around it. You would have to talk to your functional doctor and ask them, can you please test my total immunoglobulins, IgG and IgM, for example. And if they are within normal range, then yes, you will produce the antibodies you can test. So you see, it gets a little bit complicated. And I would say when you're so sick, it's probably EBV. You don't need validation in testing. All right, so now let's move on to a couple of ideas to help you assess whether you are reactivating or not. And I have to say that even our alumni, when they recover from EBV and living their lives and they're having fun, sometimes they return because they have reactivated, but they forgot about EBV completely, which is great. And they assumed they had flu or this or that happened. They forgot they actually were reactivating. So back to the drawing board, to the kitchen cabinet. You jump on the protocol a few days and you're done. So this is kind of a projection. This is, in the best case scenario, this is actually doable. So anyway, one of the things that you want to track down when you start sliding into this, I've been hit by a truck below baseline, is track if there's any event recently that tipped you over emotionally, spiritually, mentally, physically, physiologically, any stressful event, too many changes, moving, selling house, buying house, divorce, wedding, publishing a book, being promoted, losing a job, losing a loved one, any stressful events on different, surgery, a car accident. These things can tip the body over, and that's it. Kind of a reactivating, triggering point for EBV because it's an opportunist. It will exploit your vulnerabilities. So if something like that is obvious, you're going through a bad divorce, yeah, it's expected that EBV will try to reactivate. Let's look at the emotional presentations that you may have, that you may be surprised with, if you're new to it. That may indicate that you are reactivating. We often see panic attacks, anxiety attacks, or anxiety. People suddenly can't drive. people have depressive incidents. And these are individuals that normally do not, they are not anxiety type personalities. They are not depressive personalities. So they are surprised. They can't deal with it because they don't understand, how can I be so anxious? I have people driving that have to pull the car off and turn it off on the road before an anxiety attack kicks in, and they're not able to actually drive. I had a student whose dream and goal for a program with us was to be able to drive to her daughter's graduation because she had anxiety through the roof, couldn't drive. I had a performing artist, a musician, who was afraid she would never be able to go on the road and travel again to perform because of anxieties in the car. People can fly. So if you have emotional changes, and depression, of course, is circumstantial. So you are depressed because you're so sick. But sometimes, and sometimes you're a mother and you're just not there as a mom for kids, and that is very depressing. But sometimes you're just depressed and it's the virus that is interfering with the brain. So that all may be the reasons why you are reactivating. Watch number 2, watch your mental deterioration. Anytime you feel, you have brain fog, you feel like you have cognitive decline, you forget what you started, you have to look for words, anything that, you complain that this is not like you and you're really frustrated, that's probably the virus, and that's probably reactivating right now. And last but not least, the biggest bucket that I could spend 5 hours discussing is the physical challenges and the physical presentations. And most people, by the time they have chronic EBV, they know their physical presentations of reactivations. I'm going to go through some of the basic ones. So, you have that baseline that is EBV, which is not fun. But then you go even worse in oftentimes the lymph nodes, the throat, the hoarse throat, clearing throat, pain. There's a specific form of insomnia in the middle of the nights where you are up and wired and can't sleep. Like I discussed, instead of being able to walk for a minute around the block, you can only walk maybe from your bedroom to the kitchen and back, and you're spent for the day. So that's EBV. Anytime we're talking about energy dip, energy going down the drain, the fatigue being laden, the kind of fatigue you can't explain to anyone unless they themselves experience it. It's very hard to explain. And then another presentation is general achiness, feeling like it's the worst flu in the world, muscle aches, bone aches, fibromyalgia-like symptoms. And then any specific part of the body may be aching. People feel like their liver is aching or the spleen is aching, muscles, specific organ areas. It really is hard to say because everybody is different. And then there's a bucket full of all kinds of things like headaches, skin rashes, impaired gut function, vertigo, ataxia, tinnitus. Oftentimes the virus is in the ear and affects your balance. So lots of presentations that can go down the drain, and so you're really incapacitated. So I hope this training helps you see that it's pretty straightforward to know, learn what your baseline is between reactivations with the virus compared to where you used to be before the virus, and then where you dip when you have reactivation. I hope this is helpful, and if you like this training and find it helpful and useful, give us thumbs up and join us for all our free trainings in our YouTube channel, EBV Global Institute, and I will see you on the next training. Thank you so much for attending.